Alvatyne Thomas was born on March 27, 1990, and lived in St. Louis, Missouri. At just 31 years old, she was a devoted mother of 5, known for her hardworking spirit, nurturing nature, and fierce love for her children. She had a passion for cooking and worked tirelessly to create a stable home, even while quietly enduring an abusive relationship with the father of her youngest child, Carl Mayberry. On the night of December 27, 2021, police were dispatched to Alvatyne's home on Oregon Avenue in St. Louis for a welfare check. What they found was horrific. Alvatyne was discovered dead sitting in a chair. A plastic bag had been taped tightly around her head, and she had been shot in the back. Her ear was severed, her forehead was severely swollen, and her hands showed clear signs of a struggle. Bleach had been poured over her body, likely in an attempt to destroy forensic evidence. Interestingly, there were no signs of forced entry. The violence of the scene pointed to someone who knew her. Detectives quickly turned their focus to Carl Mayberry, Alvatyne's boyfriend and the father of her youngest child. Her family told police about the history of abuse in the relationship. When questioned, Mayberry claimed he had been at work during the time of the murder. But co-workers told a different story. They said he disappeared from his job for several hours and returned in different clothes, visibly shaken. Text messages from Alvatyne's phone revealed she had been messaging with Mayberry shortly before her death, telling him she was at home and about to go to sleep. Investigators then searched Mayberry's phone and social media accounts, and what they found was chilling. Shortly after Alvatyne's murder, Mayberry had messaged someone with details about the crime scene, writing that she was found dead in the kitchen with a plastic bag wrapped around her head. This specific detail had not yet been made public. Around the same time, he was also searching online for first-degree murder defenses and can he say, she say be used against a person for murder in Missouri. He even texted a criminal defense attorney to ask how much it would cost to defend a murder. Despite the overwhelming evidence, charges against him were delayed. In May 2022, St. Louis homicide detectives requested a meeting with then-Circuit Attorney Kim Gardner's office to present the case, but their request was ignored. With no action taken, Mayberry ended up in federal custody on unrelated charges. The case then stalled until Mayberry's release from federal prison in 2025. This time, under new Circuit Attorney Gabe Gore, investigators finally gained traction. They secured a search warrant, and on May 7, 2025, nearly 4 years after Alvatyne's death, Carl Mayberry was arrested and charged with first-degree murder and unlawful possession of a firearm. At the time of his arrest, Mayberry, a convicted felon on federal probation for prior assault and firearm charges, was found with a loaded gun hidden inside his lunchbox. Mayberry made his initial court appearance on May 9, 2025, and remains in custody at the St. Louis City Justice Center without bond. For Alvatyne's family, the long-overdue arrest was bittersweet. It brought a measure of peace, but also reopened old wounds. They remember Alvatyne as a vibrant, loving mother whose life was stolen in an act of cold, calculated brutality. Now they continue to fight for her memory and for justice that should have come far sooner. Chelsea Alexandra King was born on July 1, 1992, and by the time she was 17, she was thriving in Poway, California. Chelsea was described as bright, driven, kind, and full of promise, the kind of person who left a lasting impression. She was a straight-A student with plans for college, had a deep love for music, and played with the San Diego Youth Symphony. She had her whole future ahead of her until a horrible tragedy occurred in early 2010. On the afternoon of February 25, 2010, Chelsea headed out for a jog at Rancho Bernardo Community Park, something she often did. But this time, she never came back. When she didn't return home, her father went to the park to look for her. Upon arrival, he found her car parked near the trail with some of her personal items still inside, but there was no sign of Chelsea. A search began immediately. Days later, one of her items of clothing was recovered, and DNA testing linked it to a local sex offender by the name of John Albert Gardner III. On March 2nd, Chelsea's body was discovered buried in a shallow grave near Lake Hodges. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled to death. Gardner, who was 30 at the time, had attacked her within an hour of her run, dragged her to a secluded area, and committed the horrific crime before burying her body in the woods. 3 days after the murder, Gardner was arrested outside a restaurant in Escondido. The DNA evidence from Chelsea's clothing was the key that connected him to her murder, but the nightmare didn't end there. During questioning, Gardner confessed to another crime that had haunted the community for over a year. 14-year-old Amber Dubois had disappeared on February 13, 2009, while walking to Escondido High School. She had been excited that day, carrying a check in her pocket to put down a deposit on a lamb she was planning to raise for the fair. She had already picked out the name, Nanette, a nod to her French heritage on her father's side. Sadly, Amber never made it to school that day. For 13 long months, her family searched and hoped. Then Gardner led police to her remains, found in a remote area near the Pala Indian Reservation. His only condition was that the information couldn't be used to charge him with her murder. Prosecutors had no choice but to agree, since they didn't have the evidence to convict him without his confession. It was a gut-wrenching decision, but one that brought some long-awaited answers to Amber's grieving family. Gardner's background was deeply troubling. He had been in psychiatric treatment since childhood and was first hospitalized at the age of 10. He claimed his father was a violent alcoholic, and school records listed him as seriously emotionally disturbed. After graduating from Rim of the World High School in Lake Arrowhead in 1997, he drifted between jobs and cities, eventually settling in San Diego. In 2000, Gardner was convicted for being sexually inappropriate with a 13-year-old neighbor and sentenced to 5 years in prison. After his release, he was placed on parole, but repeatedly violated its terms, including living too close to a school, using drugs, and spending time in remote areas. At one point, he was tracked via GPS, but still managed to avoid real consequences despite logging over 160 parole violations. That same GPS data would later show him near the very locations where Chelsea and Amber's remains were found. Even before Chelsea's murder, Gardner had attacked another woman. On December 27, 2009, just 2 months before Chelsea vanished, he attempted to sexually assault 22-year-old jogger Candice Monseo near the same park. She bravely fought him off, elbowing him in the face and breaking his nose, which likely saved her life. Her reports helped authorities later link Gardner to Chelsea's case. On April 16, 2010, Gardner pleaded guilty to the sexual assault and murders of both Chelsea King and Amber Dubois, and to the attempted sexual assault of Candice Monseo. In exchange for his guilty plea, prosecutors agreed not to seek the death penalty. On May 14th, he was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without parole, plus 25 years to life for the attempted rape and 24 more years for prior convictions. He also waived his right to appeal. Though nothing could undo the pain he caused, Chelsea and Amber's families turned their grief into action. Chelsea's parents, Brent and Kelly, fought hard for legislative change, and their efforts eventually paid off. In September 2010, Chelsea's law was passed in California and mandates tougher penalties for violent sex offenders, including lifetime sentences after a first conviction and stricter monitoring through GPS. It also restricts certain offenders from entering public parks. To carry on Chelsea's legacy, her family founded the Chelsea's Light Foundation. The nonprofit awards scholarships through the Sunflower Scholarship Fund and hosts an annual 5K run called Finish Chelsea's Run. In 2014, the event raised more than $85,000. Portions of local roadways were also renamed to honor both girls. State Road 78 now includes the Amber Dubois Memorial Highway, while the bridge over Lake Hodges on Interstate 15 bears the name Chelsea King Memorial Bridge. Thankfully, this monster will spend the rest of his life behind bars, where he could never hurt another innocent soul again. Christina Marie Williams was born on May 1, 1985, in Okinawa Prefecture, Japan. Christina came from a military family. Her mother was Filipina, and her father served in the U.S. Navy. Before moving to California, the Williams family had been stationed at Yokosuka Naval Base in Japan. Christina was adjusting to life in Seaside, California, and attending Fitch Middle School. On the evening of June 12, 1998, Christina took her dog, Greg, out for a walk in the Fort Ord neighborhood, a military housing area on the Monterey Peninsula. About 45 minutes later, Greg returned home alone, still trailing his leash. Christina, however, was nowhere to be found. After being reported missing, an enormous search effort got underway. The FBI quickly took over the case, and national attention poured in. Witnesses reported seeing a scared-looking girl in a car with two unidentified men, but nothing concrete came of it. Her disappearance gained nationwide attention, and even celebrities like Mariah Carey and Reggie Jackson made public pleas for information. Despite all the efforts, Christina's trail went cold until exactly 7 months later. In January 1999, a UC Santa Cruz botanist conducting a survey on the old Fort Ord base stumbled upon Christina's skeletal remains, hidden under branches in a remote area just 3 miles from her home. The spot had been searched before, but nothing was found at the time. Her body was so decomposed that the cause of death could not be determined, but investigators knew they were looking at a homicide. By the early 2000s, attention had quietly shifted to a convicted sex offender named Charles Holofield. He was already on law enforcement's radar and had no alibi the night Christina vanished. He was also known to frequent the area where her remains were found. Holofield had a disturbing record. He had served time for multiple sex assaults and was known for targeting teenage girls. At one point, his then-girlfriend provided him with an alibi, claiming he was home with her the night Christina went missing. But years later, she recanted, telling authorities she had lied because she was terrified of him. She admitted he had threatened her and was physically abusive during their relationship. Despite this chilling revelation and circumstantial evidence pointing to Holofield, there still wasn't enough forensic proof to file charges until forensic technology advanced. In 2017, the breakthrough in the case finally came. Christina's underwear was retested by the California DOJ Crime Lab, and DNA was found. The DNA profile matched Holofield exactly. He was already in prison at the time, serving 2 life sentences for sexually assaulting teenage girls in the early 80s and attempting to abduct another young woman at gunpoint. Rather than face a jury trial and the possibility of a death sentence, Holofield waived his right to a jury and was tried in a court trial. After hearing 10 days of testimony, including from his past victims, Judge Pamela Butler found him guilty of kidnapping, sexually assaulting, and murdering Christina. She sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. This long-awaited conviction brought some measure of closure to Christina's grieving family. Her parents, Michael and Alice Williams, had held out hope for 7 agonizing months after her disappearance and then spent nearly 20 more years praying for justice. Laura Arroyo was born on January 14, 1982, to parents Louis and Laura. At the age of 9, Laura was living in Otay Mesa, California, with her parents and 2 older brothers when a horrible tragedy occurred. On the night of June 19, 1991, she was home in her pajamas, curled up watching TV with her mom in their upstairs apartment when someone knocked on the front door. Around 9:10 p.m., Laura ran downstairs to answer it. Her dad, who had just finished bathing his 2 sons, remembered hearing her say, "Who is it?" but no response came. 10 minutes passed, and when she didn't come back, Lewis went down to check and found the door wide open, but Laura was gone. At first, her family wasn't too alarmed. They thought maybe one of the kids she had been playing with earlier had come back for her, but when they went outside and started asking around, no one had seen her. That's when the panic set in. Lewis spent the night driving around the neighborhood, calling her name, while his wife and sons waited in agony at home. Family and friends also stepped up and helped them create 300 flyers to hand out that night. Law enforcement wasn't immediately helpful, most likely because when Lewis called for help, right after discovering his daughter was missing, he was placed on hold for 20 minutes. Police later said he likely called a non-emergency number by mistake, which may have caused the delay. Around 6:30 the next morning, 2 women found Laura's body on the sidewalk in a Chula Vista industrial area, about 3.5 miles from her home. She was still wearing her pink pajamas. She had been stabbed multiple times and bludgeoned to death, possibly with a pickaxe, and there were signs she'd been strangled. At the time, police had no leads, no motive, and no witnesses. What made it more frightening was that just 2 weeks earlier, another 9-year-old boy who lived in the same apartment complex had nearly been abducted by 2 women. He thankfully managed to escape, but it raised fears that a crazed individual was on the loose in the area. Still, police weren't sure if the 2 incidents were connected. One early theory was that Laura might have known her killer. There were no signs of a struggle, and she didn't scream, which suggested she may have opened the door to someone she trusted, but police couldn't be sure. 12 years later, in 2003, Laura's case was re-examined, thanks to a newly formed cold case unit at the San Diego County District Attorney's Office. Technological advances in DNA testing revealed biological evidence that hadn't been detected during the original investigation. Samples taken from Laura's pajamas, mouth, neck, and fingernails were retested, and the DNA profile matched a man named Manuel Bracamontes, who had lived in a nearby unit until about a week before Laura was killed. Bracamontes had been a neighbor at the time, living with his girlfriend and their children. Several witnesses came forward, saying they'd seen him around the complex the night Laura disappeared. One child even remembered him saying something that lured Laura toward the door. When police tracked him down in 2003, Bracamontes tried to flee and led them on a high-speed chase before crashing his car. At that point, he was arrested and charged with Laura's kidnapping, sexual assault, and murder. The evidence against him was overwhelming. DNA linked him to stains on Laura's clothing and to swabs collected during her autopsy. They found him guilty, and because of the brutality of the crime and the special circumstances, including kidnapping and sexual assault, they recommended the death penalty. In 2005, Bracamontes was formally sentenced to death. Years later, the California Supreme Court upheld both Bracamontes' conviction and his death sentence. And as of May 2025, Manuel Bracamontes remains on death row awaiting execution. Lily Bell Burk was born on June 12, 1992, to parents Greg Burk and Deborah Drews. She was a kind, creative, and deeply intelligent 17-year-old who lived in Los Angeles. A student at Oakwood School in North Hollywood, Lily was passionate about writing, theater, and helping others. She was known for her warmth, sense of humor, and genuine compassion, someone who brought light to everyone around her. On the afternoon of July 24, 2009, Lily left her family's home in the Los Feliz neighborhood to run a quick errand for her mom, who worked as an attorney and adjunct professor at Southwestern Law School. Her task was simple: pick up some papers from the school's downtown campus. She arrived around 2:45 p.m., but at some point shortly after leaving the building, Lily crossed paths with a man named Charlie Samuel. Samuel, 50 years old at the time, was a parolee with a long and violent criminal record. That same day, he had been temporarily released from a residential drug treatment center under the pretense of going to the DMV, which was closed. Instead, he ended up in downtown Los Angeles, where he encountered Lily. The exact details of how he coerced or forced her into her own car are still unclear, but what followed was a terrifying ordeal. Over the next 2 hours, Samuel made Lily drive to several ATMs in an attempt to withdraw cash using her credit card. At some point, Lily called both her mother and father, asking how to use the credit card to get cash. She didn't say anything to suggest she was in danger. She said she needed the money to buy shoes, and her father told her that the card couldn't be used at an ATM. He then suggested she come home, and Lily agreed. What her parents didn't know was that Lily was being held against her will and that they would never see their daughter alive again. During that window of time, Lily did everything she could to survive. Police later said there were clear signs that she had fought back against her attacker. She suffered blunt force trauma and ultimately died from a slash wound to her neck. Samuel abandoned Lily's black Volvo around 5 p.m. in a downtown parking lot at 458 South Alameda Street, leaving her body in the passenger seat. He then walked just a few blocks away, where he began drinking on Skid Row, a seedy part of downtown Los Angeles. LAPD mounted officers detained him for public drinking and possession of a crack pipe, completely unaware of the crime he had just committed. Lily's parents reported her missing around 7 p.m. when she failed to return home. They tracked her phone and checked with their bank to confirm failed ATM transactions. Police treated the report seriously and began searching immediately. The next morning at 6:15 a.m., a downtown business employee noticed Lily's body inside her car and called 911. Detectives quickly began combing through the evidence. Fresh fingerprints were found on a soda can in her car, and they matched the man already in custody, Charlie Samuel. Surveillance footage showed him walking away from Lily's car and also appeared on ATM cameras with his arm tightly around her. Blood on the shirt Samuel was wearing during his arrest was confirmed to be Lily's. The following night, he was formally charged with her murder. Charlie Samuel's record stretched back decades. In 1986, he had kidnapped an elderly man, forced him to an ATM, and assaulted him when he couldn't withdraw money. That case, and others, should have added up to a third strike under California's 3 strikes law, which would have required a 25 years to life sentence. But a clerical error in his rap sheet misrepresented his prior convictions. As a result, when Samuel was convicted of burglary in 1997, prosecutors didn't realize it qualified as a third strike. He served his time and was eventually released. On May 27, 2010, Samuel stood in court, dressed in jail scrubs and shackled, and pleaded guilty to the kidnapping, robbery, and murder of Lily Burk. The plea deal allowed him to avoid the death penalty. He addressed Lily's family in court, saying, "I'd like to deeply, truly apologize to the family for the grief I've caused them for the loss of their child. I pray to God that you may forgive me one day." Lily's parents, sitting quietly in the front row, issued a statement afterward saying they were satisfied justice had been served and grateful that the criminal proceedings were over. They could now focus on keeping Lily's memory alive. The tragedy of Lily's murder stunned the city of Los Angeles and prompted public outcry over the flaws in the parole system. A simple bureaucratic mistake meant that a violent repeat offender was free to walk the streets. Thankfully, Samuel is behind bars for good and can never hurt another innocent person.